Let's explore the phenomena and forces involved in being trapped in an identity. The essential self, the center at the core of the psyche, is very much like a witness, and it cannot be damaged. But the identity is the lens through which that presence engages with the larger energy field or ecology of reality. That identity, or an identity, is composed of a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, to acknowledge the pattern of physicality. So the self invests in an identity. The self builds an identity, which is an interference pattern of repeated thoughts, feelings, words, actions, and existence in the body. But how does the self identify with the identity? Because when you understand that the identity is the lens through which that self expresses itself and experiences reality, then it's very much like a vehicle that one can get into and use to navigate around the world and step out of. It's very much like a set of clothes. And when the clothes are dirty, they need to be let go of and washed. When you're done arriving at the destination, you can let go of the identity. You can let go of the car. So how is it that we get trapped in an identity? There's a couple of things. One of them is the confusion, meaning in a very materialistic cult, there is no separate self. There is only the expression, because the core self is the energy. It's the yin, the feminine source of all of the different identities, which are the more yang or masculine expression of the self. So the yin is like the light, and the identity is the cutout. And so as the light passes through the cutout and is projected onto the wall of reality, that pattern in a materialistic paradigm is what's seen. And so born into a materialistic cult where all that is real is the pattern on the wall, and the light that shines through that pattern of identity and creates that impact in reality is denied, is ignored. Then there is no awareness within the self of existence outside the identity. Another way of saying this is there's no awareness in the ego of existence beyond the ego. There is a very, the entirety of consciousness and of the self is reduced to the fragility, the most fragile aspect of the self, which is the identity. Now, the identity is fragile, both because it cannot exist without the ecology, meaning even take the physical body. If the planet stops producing oxygen because all the trees die or something like that, then this identity cannot live without that. So the ego identity, this pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is completely dependent on the relationship with the other, with reality, with the larger ecology. And it's also the smallest part. If you think of the ecology as the entire universe, the universe gives birth to a solar system, the solar system gives birth to a planet, the planet gives birth to a species, and the species gives birth to a race, and the race gives birth to a culture, and the culture gives birth to a family, and the family gives birth to the individual. If any of those things are not there, the individual doesn't exist. If food disappears, if light disappears, if air disappears, if the ancestors disappear, you don't have the individual. So you have this incredibly fragile pattern of energy that's known as the identity. And in this sense of identity, when we identify with that, when that becomes all of us, it creates a great panic around survival, around security, around love and belonging for the identity. Now, the larger self is secure. The light, the consciousness that flows through the self and through the identity and creates the pattern on the wall, that part is secure. You can have 1,000 lives and 1,000 deaths, and that light that's projected through the identity is innate and cannot be destroyed. But each identity not only can be destroyed, not only can be changed, but absolutely will, meaning death for the identity is inevitable. And in that death of identity, we have the trauma of the ego, the trauma of the self that we identify with. So materialism pushes us into that identity. Psychological illiteracy about consciousness, also pushes us into that identity. The behavior and mirroring of other people also puts us into that identity, meaning when we're surrounded by people who pretend that the be-all and end-all of existence is their physical body, when we're surrounded by that behavior, we are given the message, we're given the belief, we're infected with the paradigm that this is all there is. And that to lose that is what? To be alone, to be lonely forever, to stop to cease to have any value and any meaning. And so it becomes a really big deal. It becomes a really big deal to lose our identity. Now, the other phenomena that ties into this is trauma, sociopathic behavior, and the subsequent fear of the unknown. So, as we are traumatized, tormented, threatened, abandoned, betrayed, lied to, financially ruined, raped, beaten up, hit, locked up, violated. As we are treated sociopathically by other people, the fear of death increases, and the body, in its anxiety, captures more and more attention. Meaning you may be off in a nice daydream or something, but if someone comes up and hits you and then hits you again, you focus in, the survival instincts of the body identity capture all the awareness in the body in order to survive and then feel secure in that survival. And as a result, the body identity that is induced and maintained in the culture, the body identity is afraid then of transcendence, is afraid of the larger identity, because you were daydreaming. And that was a more interesting part of who you were than the sidewalk or the school or the building that was in front of you. That's not very interesting. Your imagination, your fantasy, which is, of course, part of who you are. But that reality becomes correlated with a threat, because when you're in a sociopathic environment and the body is dreaming, is daydreaming, is not fully in defense mode, in a sociopathic environment, that is a target that is identified as a vulnerability to violate, to traumatize that person. And you'll see this in school. Someone's daydreaming and the bully will target them as, we can knock their books down, we can push them down the stairs, and they won't know what's hit them because they were dreaming. And this attack on the larger sense of self makes the body fear that larger sense of identity. And as a result, there is a narrowing. I'm going to push that part of me away, and I'm going to focus here, and I'm going to be ready, and I'm going to defend myself. As we narrow in, though, we identify more and more with the body, with our sense of physical boundaries. And the more we identify with something, the more precious it is. You can think of it as a belief system. Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, whatever. If it's just a belief system and that belief system is violated, let's say you're a devout American, and because the flag of the United States is a symbol of what you are devout about, then the symbol gets elevated. Well, now if someone cuts the flag or burns the flag or does graffiti on the flag, there's a sense that somehow what's your core is being violated. And this is the cause for war. You violated my sense of identity. I identify with these boundaries, and you've just crossed over the boundary without permission. You violated the boundary. And so now I am threatened because I identify with the boundary. If I don't identify with the boundary, I'm not threatened. There's no problem whatsoever. That's a piece of land that the paper says that I own. The papers say that I have these rights. You walked across the land. I'm not threatened. This is my body. You did this to my body. You didn't do something to me unless I identify with the body, unless I identify I am the land. I am the law. I am this thing. Now we're defending an identity. We're defending a boundary. Now, of course, the reason for war is that what everyone identifies with is different. And so, if I identify with this as being mine for this reason, and you identify with that being your right for this other reason, we're going to have a clash at the boundary. We're going to have a clash in the domain of identity. And And that clash will tend to follow a childhood template of what happened when our parents hit us, what happened when this or that happened. What worked? If we fought back and said, hey, don't hit me, Dad, and he hit you even harder, and you said, hey, stop hitting me, and he hit you even harder, then you begin to correlate defense of the body with violation of the body. If I defend my body will be violated more. And so a new defense program comes in. I won't defend my body so that I can defend my body. I'll stop protesting, and I'll just wait out the violence, because the violation of that boundary is such that it'll get worse the more I defend myself. And this creates a lot of fear for the identity, for the ego, because it's learned, one, that the world is sociopathic and will hurt it, and two, that the world will not respect boundaries, and three, that things get worse if you protest the violation. And so you're just basically frozen and stuck in that state of, not being able to do anything if people cross your boundaries in a paradigm where people will cross your boundaries. And so you can you have a collapse, a stalemate, a frustration. And that's painful, and that's lonely. And that feels very real. The pain and the loneliness says that this boundary, this identity is real. So then we get frightened of the pain, frightened of the fear. And we take more and more steps to avoid that pain and that fear. But all of that invests more and more attention in the lens and in defending the lens. And as a result, that whole identity is getting more and more consuming. It's consuming our awareness. It's consuming our consciousness as we defend the identity, as we defend the identity we believe to be ourselves. So one of the balancing dynamics of the ego is that the more it is traumatized, the more it is threatened, the more it is bullied, the more it attacks and defends and puts up energy and walls in the defense. And so in that dance of bullying and defense, there's a problem. And the problem is that identity has to change. See, part of the challenge in a cult is that in order to fit into the cult, a fear-based cult wants harmony, it wants compliance, it wants mirroring, it wants a copy. It says, if you want to be part of this cult, talk like this, act like this, eat like this, spend these things as money. Don't trade, don't give people a chicken, give people this bit of paper. And that's the way we do things in this cult. If you want to be a part of the cult, then you have to copy us. So that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, all cults have an area of irrationality, of insanity, of destructiveness, of inefficiency, of just a big gap in intelligence. And so if you copy the cult, you take on that debt, that disconnect with the rest of reality. because you have your own psyche to deal with and all the energy and truths in the inside, and you have the outer ecology, the plants, the trees, the planet, etc., the universe. You've got all of that ecology. And then you've got the cult, which is in the middle. That is partly crazy. It's somewhat out of sync with yourself, and it's somewhere out of sync with the larger ecology. And so you have to choose where your allegiance lies. Am I going to build my identity based on what's truthful inside, but that gets mocked, ridiculed, censured, captured, killed in the cult? Or do I want to adopt an identity that is popular and sanctioned in the cult, but violates part of the psyche? Or do I want to attune to my outer ecology, the science of what the planet needs, this and that and the other, that is inconsistent? For example, I own a piece of land in Marin County, and I could say that what seems to be most consistent with the ecology is to build smaller houses. In other words, what the ecology needs is for me to figure out the smallest comfortable place that I can live in as an individual and build to that. But that's in violation of the cult, because the cult says it is illegal to build a house for less than 1,200 square feet. You could say, but that's a violation of the ecology, and it's a violation of myself, meaning I value the ecology more than I value my cult. And so I'm going to build the house at 600 square feet, which is more than enough for me as an individual, the way that I live. But the cult is a little bit crazy, meaning the cult will arrest me, not give me a building permit, not give me a bank loan, steal my possessions, fine me, take extraordinary measures to damage my life if I attempt to build a 600 square foot house. No problem with the neighbors, nothing. I mean, who wants to live next to a big house when they could live next to a small house? It doesn't matter. The cult says you have to do this. If you don't do that, the full weight of the cult, the police, the IRS, the health department, they're all going to gang up on you and attack your right to honor yourself and honor the environment. Now, I say the cult is, crazy in a portion, because there are other things that you could say, well, that's intelligent, meaning the same cult that makes it illegal for me to build a smaller house also makes it illegal for me to cut certain trees. Now, the reason for that is supposedly for the environment. And the reason for you'd think, well, you have to cut less trees if it's a smaller house. So but you have a schizophrenia in the cult, because there's two values. What they're valuing with the 1,200 square foot, presumably, was property values, meaning they want to guarantee the neighbors that because a 600 square foot house would sell for less money than would a 1,200 or a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot house. They want to, and because real estate values are in part determined by what's called comparables. So if my house sells for $500,000 less than both neighbors, and the system compares the value of this house relative to the value of this house, and it's a poorly designed system, then their house will appraise for less money. And so the regulation is there to protect the financial assets of the neighbors, to navigate a faulty system. Because anyone who's intelligent would say, of course, you have to pay more money for a 3,000 square foot house than a 600 square foot house. But just because you have to pay more money for a 3,000 square foot house than a 600 square foot house does not mean the 600 square foot house is not better for the ecology, is not better for human freedom, is not better for the neighbor's views, is not better for the neighbor's everything. I mean, if you're a neighbor and you could live next to a 3,000 square foot house right up against the property line, or a 600 square foot house tucked 20 feet away, which would you rather? But it's against the law. And then we're a cult of laws. So even when the law is insane, we have to keep them. You can say, well, I mean, I'm not insane. I don't want to follow an insane law. Well, then you can go to prison and have your tax dollars used to seize your possessions, to banish, to have you basically arrested for living in your own house. Well, this is then one of the direct correlations with homelessness in my county, meaning people on the street cannot afford to follow 1,000 specific building codes and build 1,200 square foot homes with the meager savings they have on the street. And so we create more and more homelessness every single year to satisfy the dogma, the insanity of the cult, which is out of sync with its environment, and it's out of sync with personal freedom. And so there's the distinction. Now, that's a pretty easy thing to observe. It's a pretty easy form of insanity to spot. But you have similar insanities around education, around work, around romance, around the dying ritual of a human being. I mean, every single area of a cult is partially insane. And in some cases, it's far more insane than if the cult didn't exist at all. For example, if you remove all of the 100 or all of the 1,000 specific building codes and zoning and laws in my county, every single person would be legally housed. If you go back 500 years before a single regulation was passed, the Native Americans were living mortgage-free, 100% sheltered, without a single dollar of public money spent either banning people from their homes or living in their homes. And so you have an issue where the cult has engineered homelessness and made it illegal to stop the homelessness that it engineers. And every cult, in order to have some sense of legitimacy, claims that it's the best cult, that it's the right cult, that you should fit into it. But every cult is a little bit or a lot crazy. So we have the cult identity, we have our personal identity, we have our ecological identity. Because if we're being scientific, this identity does not exist without the larger identity. If we're being scientific, we are a part of a larger ecology, as is everything and everyone else. Meaning we're a small part of a larger body that is functioning in relationship. We're just trained in the myopia of the cult to focus on the part rather than the whole, because we are an individualistic cult as opposed to an ecological cult. You could also ignore the individual and focus on the larger pattern of reality, but then we would be an ecological cult and not an individual cult. And it could also go to the extreme of banning the acknowledgement of the independent self. So in this sense of identity, we must, when there is a schizophrenic identity in the cult, we must choose how much we can incorporate the ecology of the inner self and the outer reality with the cult dynamic without being attacked by the cult. And this is a dicey thing when the cult is functioning like a cancer in the larger ecology. Then if we adopt the cult fully, we become a cancer in relationship to the larger self and the inner self. But if we don't become a cancer, we become attacked as part of the ecology that the cult is organized to, in effect, attack, to consume, to violate, to dishonor, to derank. So it's a tricky dance for that true sense of self. Now, the fear of loneliness in an ecology, in an ecological framework, in an interdependent framework, in which we depend on other people, meaning we are a social mammalian species. We have a need for love and belonging. And with that need of love and belonging comes the need for acceptance. And so if the cult will not accept who we are, will not accept an intelligent ecological identity, will in fact attack it and rewards another identity, we have a grief either way, we have a trauma either way. We're either violating ourself and the larger ecology, or we're violating the cult and giving up on love and belonging, which is one of our needs. A lot of the loneliness, a lot of the grief, a lot of the fear that we feel comes from that sense. The sense that who we are is dishonored. The sense that who we are is not welcome. The cult also makes it illegal to feel and voice these feelings. It does so by being busy. It does so by deranking feelings. The more intense and vulnerable the feelings, the lower your rank, until you're out of the cult, even to the extent of locking people up and institutionalizing them for having intense feelings about the sociopathic, schizophrenic nature of the cult, in a cult that is so self-referential that the truth of the larger ecology sounds insane, whereas it makes more sense to adapt a cult sustainably to its ecology than it does to define a cult self-referentially and proceed to defend that cult independent of the impact it has on the larger ecological bodies of which we are a part. Meaning every cult that defines itself without relationship to the larger ecology, in violation to the larger ecology, ultimately collapses, as does every cancer. Every cancer defines itself out of sync with the larger body of its host. And the cancer has the ability and freedom to replicate and to self-referentially organize and grow within the host body. However, at the most successful moment of a cancer's career, when it completely consumes every aspect of its host, the host dies. And as soon as the host dies, the cancer dies with it. And so it is ultimately the death of a cult to perpetuate a dogma, a self-referential feedback loop, out of context with its larger environment. It's ultimately self-destructive to have an identity, cultural or otherwise, that ensures the destruction of one's host body, the larger self that we are all a part of. There is no scientific distinction between the individual and the universe. The individual cannot exist without the planet, and the planet cannot exist without the solar system, and the solar system cannot exist without the universe. If you destroy the universe to protect the identity of the individual, you don't know math. You don't understand basic science, and that form of stupidity is systematically eliminated over time from the algorithm of life, because it doesn't go anywhere.